뉴욕나우. 안녕하세요. 한국경제신문 뉴욕 특파원 강영연입니다. 글로벌 시장에서 통하는 투자법을 알려드리는 뉴욕나우. 오늘은 팀 황 피스컬노트 대표 인터뷰를 준비했습니다. 황 대표는 피스컬노트의 창업자이자 CEO입니다. 2013년 회사를 설립했습니다. 지난달 스팩상장을 발표하며 기업가치가 13억 달러, 그러니까 1조 5천억 원으로 평가됐습니다. 미국 행정부와 의회, 국방부, CIA, FBA 등과 함께 테슬라, 네슬레, 월가의 헤지펀드, 증권사 등이 모두 피스컬노트의 주요 고객입니다. 내년 초 나스닥 시장에 스펙 상장할 계획인데요. 황 CEO에게 현재 상장 준비 상황과 함께 앞으로 계획 등을 자세히 들어보겠습니다.
So basically what FiscalNote does is we sell legal data to our customers on a subscription basis. So very similar to a Bloomberg terminal where say stock traders may buy this terminal for $30,000 a year and get stock prices and information and news. We basically applied that same business model into the legal world. So we collect legislation, regulations, and court cases, and government actions and press releases. We put all that into a platform, and then we sell that platform on a subscription basis to lawyers and companies and government agencies, nonprofits, hedge funds that are trying to understand what governments are doing. So if there's a ride-sharing company that's really trying to understand ride-sharing regulations, then their lawyers will buy our platform on a year-over-year basis, pay some subscription fee as a subscriber between $10,000 and $200,000-$300,000 a year. And then their lawyers can get real-time updates around how laws are changing. They can search the database of global laws. They can basically build workflows in the cloud, essentially, to comply with those regulations. But it's a software platform that helps you understand the law and then implement those laws within a company. So we tried to, in comparison to competition like LexisNexis or Thomson Reuters or Bloomberg or Refinitiv, really differentiate on the breadth of our content, so how much information that we have. And we do that primarily by using artificial intelligence. So by using AI, we can essentially grab more data on a faster basis with less people and less resources and less investment. Thomson Reuters is almost 150-year-old company, and they still use techniques that are almost 100-year plus old, right? So the ability to essentially use cutting-edge technology as a startup, collect, if not as much, if not more information on a much cheaper basis, means that it's a very disruptive business model at the end of the day. So the second thing is that there is a very heavy level of investment that we're making in software. So it's not just the collection of information and data, but the ability to run analytics, workflow, cloud-based software, collaboration software for lawyers on top of the data means that we're not just selling a database product, but we're actually selling a whole software product for lawyers and compliance professionals overall. So we have today more than 3,000 customers, and those 3,000 customers include hundreds of federal government agencies like the White House, so the Executive Office of the President, every member of the House and the Senate in the United States Congress, the Department of Defense, the CIA, the FBI, CDC, NIH, Federal Reserve are all existing customers of FiscalNote. We also service over half the Fortune 100, so companies like Nestle or Tesla, companies that are very heavily regulated and need to understand regulations. We're essentially helping them to understand what governments are doing. And then a big chunk of the kind of Wall Street and K Street industries. So hedge fund managers, asset managers, private equity funds, all the way to kind of large NGOs that sit in Washington and foundations. They currently use FiscalNote. So we are continuously expanding our business abroad. We don't break it down by percentage, but we do have offices today in London and Brussels and Singapore and Hong Kong and Korea, India and in Australia that serve as a base of our continued growth into the future. So there's an emerging market in the data industry called alternative data. If Bloomberg and Refinitiv and S&P Global and IHS Markit built their companies around primary information like stock prices, fixed income yields, commodities. Those are, I would say, very, very sensitive, time-sensitive pricing information. Increasingly, asset managers and hedge fund managers are looking for an edge. They want to figure out something that everybody else doesn't know, some type of analysis that they can do that enables them to understand better than everybody else. So it could be, for instance, satellite imagery, right, of shopping malls or location data or credit card transaction information or other types of information that help asset managers to understand what the world is kind of heading towards. And so FiscalNote, we built an entire business around collecting and selling data. And we did that in the legal and regulatory space. And so we're increasingly pushing, I would say, into the world of alternative data. So two companies, as an example. Earlier this year, we acquired a company called Predata that does a lot of analysis on online activity. So certainly things like YouTube views and how fast those YouTube views are growing, Wikipedia edits, interactions with Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn, web browsing patterns on an anonymized basis. That information is actually extremely useful for understanding political trends in emerging markets like in the Middle East or in Latin America, where the governments may not just yet be very transparent. And so that's a very, very useful product for us. A second is actually a company called Equilibrium that we acquired out of Singapore this summer, which collects carbon emissions data, so for ESG purposes, and the ability for our company to start addressing core ESG challenges for asset managers. I think particularly as hedge fund managers and asset managers are trying to understand supply chain risk or reputational risk or carbon risk is very, very important for our customers overall. And those are key areas that we're expanding into. So we actually built a COVID-related product in 2020, in the middle of the pandemic. So for the first time, actually, I would say pre-COVID-19, a lot of people maybe didn't pay that much attention to the government. They kind of saw it on the news or they kind of talked about it during dinner. But for many people, this was the first time that governments directly impacted their day-to-day lives, right? So should I get a vaccine or not? Should I wear a mask or not? Do I have to shut down my business? At what time do I have to shut down my business? What exemptions do I have to get when I go into the country? Can I get access to this particular emergency loan from the government? Those are very, very specific government-oriented questions that we were able to solve for many of our customers. And so you can imagine, for instance, a fast food chain, right? A large fast food chain that's trying to operate their global business. Imagine the complexity of, hundreds of different governments that are passing their own shutdown laws and regulations that are changing every single week, whether or not they can keep the restaurants open or not, at what time do you have to shut them down, what do you have to check vaccination status or not. These are very, very, very complicated questions. And the ability for us to be able to cut through all the noise and instantly generate a report is, very, very easy, right? And so, but it's actually not just the private sector, but government agencies. The US CDC is one of our customers, and they use it to track the United States' own regulations inside the country. We have customers like Johnson & Johnson who currently use FiscalNote to monitor vaccine mandates or purchases by governments or whatever it is. And so I think that we are right in the center of basically what the world is doing to kind of to really fight against the pandemic overall. So we generally don't have any pushback from governments around collecting laws and regulations, because a lot of the work that we do is helping to enforce existing regulations, whether that's through a democratic process or through different processes. Governments find that our ability to be able to proclaim the regulations and help companies comply with the regulations actually is of great help to them. We respect every country's own unique ability to create their own laws and regulations. That's their own right as a country. But I think that the thing that unifies every government around the world is that they want to have a rule of law. They want to make sure that if they pass a law, that people follow those laws. As an example, if you're an emerging market country in Latin America or Southeast Asia, you want people to invest into your country. You want people to open up factories. You want people to create jobs. You want people to create economic development. But companies cannot open factories if they don't know what the labor regulations are, if they don't know what the environmental regulations are. And often, in many cases, will partner with the government and say, here are the companies that want to come into your country, and here are the regulations that they're interested in. And that's, I think, been a huge value add for a lot of our customers. So we made our deal announcement with our SPAC in early November. We just filed our S4 statements with the SEC about a week ago, actually. So all that information is publicly available. At this point, we are kind of going through final comments with the SEC prior to listing, and anticipate that we'll likely see a listing in the first quarter of the new year. In the next couple weeks or so. Hard to say, with the holidays, but it's mostly it's dependent on the SEC's timetable. I think the IPO and the SPAC process, the timing is about the same. In my opinion, we were actually looking at both approaches at the same time. So we had hired investment bankers on the IPO side, and we hired investment bankers on the SPAC side. And we are going down the pathway of doing both. Ultimately, the reason why we chose our SPAC is because the SPAC that we're merging with, DSAC, is very, very, very unique in the SPAC world. Number one is that the sponsor of the SPAC, which is a hedge fund in Asia, has agreed to backstop the entirety of the trust. In a traditional SPAC process, at the time of the M&A merger, the shareholders of the SPAC have the ability to redeem their vote, right? So they can get their $10 back in the open market. Our SPAC sponsor basically said, we will backstop 100% of the SPAC proceeds. So if anybody wants to give their money back, then we'll just buy the share off of them and we'll give the money straight to the company. So that means that the $175 million in capital that DSAC currently has in their bank accounts, we have 100% certainty of that capital coming to us. The second thing is that the sponsor, Meso Capital, the hedge fund in Asia, has also agreed to anchor our PIPE investment. Not only is the hedge fund agreeing to backstop 100% of our SPAC proceeds, but they're also committing additional capital to say that they are supporting the company in the public markets. In IPO, there's many things that can go wrong, there's many things that can go right. You're subject to a lot of different changes and challenges. Obviously, for instance, last week, software companies that took a very large hit in the NASDAQ, and so that would not have been a great week to go public on an IPO basis. But for us, the certainty of the SPAC and the ability to have 100% certainty in the $275 million in capital that we will be raising in the public markets was a determining factor. Compared to a lot of other SPACs that we could have merged with, I would say this is probably the gold standard in terms of having complete certainty of the capital that we'll be raising in the markets. So our current guidance, investor guidance for 2022 is $173 million in run rate revenues by the end of the year. We are currently not EBITDA profitable, but anticipate that we will be breaking through that point in 2023. Because our business is subscription recurring revenues, we are really heavily investing because we can see our contracts actually 2-3 years out down the line. And so we still think there's a lot of opportunity, particularly in Europe and Asia, that we're investing into right now. I think the most important thing for us is the ability to leverage the public capital markets for lower cost of capital. The public markets, I think, have been at all-time highs over the course of the last couple of years. And so the ability to continuously get frictionless capital for our growth prospects, I think, is very important. The second thing is, as our stock continues to trade and increase in liquidity on the exchanges, our hope is that we can actually use our stock as significant currency for M&A. And so as a private company, it's been very difficult to conduct M&A transactions through our private stock or through private capital raises. So our intention is to be able to use our stock to be able to make that happen. In 2021, have already acquired 10 companies, kind of building out our corporate group. And so I think we anticipate on being continuously acquisitive into the future. We've already given the guidance in 2022 that our M&A pipeline will probably add another 40 million or so in sales from M&A transactions next year. So our market in general is very fragmented. So we think that there's a lot of M&A targets that are very, very digestible into our business. So typically these are smaller companies between, say, 5 and 20 million in revenues that we think we can incorporate into our platform, leverage the hundreds of salespeople and commercial operations that we have globally, and then scale those businesses much, much faster. And so we've been building out our product portfolio quite aggressively by adding on these bolt-on M&A transactions. Typically, they're in two categories. Number one is in data businesses. I'll give you two examples. We acquired Timebase in Australia, which is a legal and regulatory business in the Australian market. They gave us Australian data. Just about 2 weeks ago, we acquired a company called FrontierView, which expanded our business into a number of different macroeconomic data points like labor and wages, central bank monitoring, interest rate prices, and things like that that are useful for companies to make decisions on. So that's the first category. And the second category is software businesses. So where we think that adding this incremental software workflow can essentially give our salespeople a bigger portfolio to sell to a larger number of customers. Well, the company is a very mission-driven company. So if you actually step off the elevator bank in our company, in our headquarters, there's a statement that everyone sees. It says, "Connect the world to their governments." And every single employee that comes off of our employee bank will see that that's the mission statement of the company. Intention is to build an enduring and lasting business over a long period of time. A company that will last 50 or 100 or 200 years into the future. I don't think that demand for understanding what government wants to do is ever going to change. The techniques to be able to collect information and to understand governments may change. The importance of individual governments may change. But at the end of the day, the society as a whole needs to have a very symbiotic relationship between what the governments are working on at any given time and what the implications of those laws and regulations will be. And I think that's even more important because of lack of accountability that's occurred from, particularly in the US market, the decimation of the media industry, particularly local media, where state legislatures and city councils and governments are not being held accountable by the media industry or by journalists. And so it's very important, I think, for technologists to be able to create new business models to understand what governments are doing and the implications of those actions. And it's not just the very high level, very noisy legislation regulations like the infrastructure bill in Congress and the White House, but it's the very, very small piece of legislation. It's the increasing in plastic bottle taxes, in the city, or the changing of residential zoning regulations, by the county. Those are very, very important regulations that impact people's lives, but get zero coverage and attention. And so our belief is that we can create a new business model that helps to surface what governments are doing and creates more accountability in society. I would say that FiscalNote want to become a company that is enduring, long-lasting, and has the ability to be cataclysmic in terms of the ability to create change in society. There's many, many software companies on the NASDAQ. There's many, many companies that are private, and they create a lot of great products. They create sales software, marketing software, and HR software, and accounting software. But I think that FiscalNote is unique because of our mission, because we create products that help the most important decision makers in the world understand the implications of government. I think that even if our financials may look the same as a traditional software company, the products that we create are so influential and so different that we as a company, I think, are just completely different from the rest of the market. And so that's why I think that FiscalNote is exciting in the future and hopefully will do better in the markets.